Hi everybody. This is a video about when atheists argue with each other and how the sort of go-to accusation is that they're being just like a creationist or they're being just like a religious fundamentalist of some stripe. It's in some cases this is a bit of a below the belt kind of shot, isn't it? It's just a way of getting the ultimate low blow into the other person. It's just a case of who gets it in first a lot of the time, I think. I'm not above the level of doing this. I've compared people to creationists before. But I think when you accuse someone of being like a creationist, you've got to be able to back that up with some very substantial arguments. You can't just throw it out there like it's a trump card and say, boom, I just accused you of being like a creationist, so I win the internet war, or whatever. Like, for example, I could compare MRAs to creationists quite easily, and I'd give, if I was to do like a sort of bullet point style list, I'd say, well, they both believe in kind of alternate versions of history. They both have alternate history texts. With the religious, it's things like the Bible or the Quran or whatever particular religious text they follow. With MRAs, certainly like A Voice for Men, they have a whole timeline on their website which tells an alternate timeline of history, which tries to imply women have secretly been controlling the world for the last, I think it's 2,000 years or so. So yeah, I mean, I can make that comparison. They've both got an alternate version of history which they adhere to, which they assert to other people, and they expect people to believe. They also try and back this up with conspiracy theory, because they say, for example, the religious, certainly creationists, might say, oh, there's a secular conspiracy going on among the scientific community, and that's why all, the vast majority of people in the scientific community are not creationists, why they reject creationism as the unfalsifiable hypothesis that it is. And they embrace evolution, abiogenesis, cosmology, geology, etc., because those pass the scientific method. And so the creationist argument obviously is, oh, this is all a secular conspiracy. Really, all the evidence points to creationism, but it's all being skewed or tampered with or covered up so as to make evolutionism, in inverted commas, seem like the true conclusion. And again, MRAs will come out with similar stuff. They will say that the reason mainstream history does not agree with their gynocentric timeline is because their women, of course, having been secretly controlling the world for so long, have tampered with all the evidence and basically managed to somehow persuade all the historians in the world to change the accounts of history, so it makes women look like they were oppressed throughout history, when in fact they were supposedly controlling the world from a sort of passive position. So that would be like a couple of examples of how I would feel fully justified in comparing MRAs to creationists, in that they both have believe in an alternate version of history, and they both believe the reason said version of history is covered up is due to conspiracy. So I think I don't really have a problem with people correctly comparing other people to creationists. Atheists comparing other atheists to creationists, if you can back it up with something substantial. It can't just be a case of you're just like a creationist because I don't agree with creationists, and I don't agree with you either, so you're like a creationist. I mean, I suppose technically, this person is like a creationist if they, for that one reason. There's this one single thing that they have in common with creationists. They don't agree with me. It's like if I was to say Thunderfoot or Pat Condell or the Amazing Atheist, I could say, well, they're just like creationists because I don't agree with creationists and they don't agree with me either. So I don't. Sorry, I balls that up. I don't agree with creationists, and I don't agree with Thunderfoot, or I don't agree with Pat Condell, or I don't agree with the Amazing Atheist. So therefore, they're just like creationists. I suppose technically they do have something in common with creationists there, although it's not anything particularly significant. It just happens to be that they don't agree with Captain Andy. That was just me drinking my tea there, by the way. It wasn't a sound effect. So yeah, I think my advice to anyone who wants to throw out the "you're just like a creationist" insult is at least make sure you've got some substance to it. If you use this all the time, it loses its meaning. It just becomes a cliche. if you start calling people creationist every time they disagree with you. But I think if they can be demonstrated to believe something significantly pseudoscientific, then yes, you can justifiably compare them to a creationist. I mean, that would be the other point I'd bring up with MRAs, of course. The other reason I'd compare them to creationists is they both believe in pseudoscience. Now, I think the pseudoscience of young Earth creationism is a lot more obvious. It's a lot more blatant. I mean, the reason when I first heard about what young Earth creationism was, I'd heard a bit about it very vaguely before, but when I actually learnt what it was, I mean, straight away the first thing I said, well, the universe can't be 6,000 years old because we can see stars that are further than 6,000 light years away. That was the most obvious thing that jumped out to me immediately. There were other things as well, but that was the most obvious one because at the time I hadn't studied science since I was at school. So that was the most obvious thing that just leapt out at me. It's obvious even to someone who hadn't studied science for a number of years that this is obvious honk. But this sort of biological determinism that a lot of MRAs seem to believe in, I admit that's not as obvious. That doesn't jump out at you straight away. That does require a little bit more scrutiny. So yeah, I will give it to people that belief in evolutionary psychology or whatever is not quite as ridiculous at first glance. Yeah, with that's the thing. MRAs tend to believe in this biological determinism, which is just another pseudoscience. This is also why race realists this is another reason why I'd compare race realists to creationists, because they seem to believe in the same nonsense. This is also why a number of MRAs are also race realists. Those two groups do overlap because they both rely on biological determinism. And where was I? Yeah, because they both rely on. This is also, I mean, the reason most MRAs and most race realists, by the way, are atheists. It's not a coincidence, by the way. It doesn't just so happen that they are atheists. This is not a coincidence. They are atheists because they have a misunderstanding of evolution, of how it works. They accept that it works, but they accept it blindly. So they don't accept it because it's because they've watched debates and understood how it works. Because what you've got to remember is most atheists are just ordinary people. Most atheists are not experts in evolutionary biology or even people with a casual interest in it. They're just ordinary schmoes. And like I was when I looked at when I first learned what creationism was, I was just able to dismiss it very simply with one very important piece of information that had nothing to do with evolutionary biology. That had to do with astronomy, or the distance away that stars are. And that's a very basic bit of astronomy that I learned in primary school. It's not it's not sort of secret knowledge. I think they're very similar. They accept evolution, abiogenesis, cosmology, whatever, and geology as explanations rather than creationism, because it seems like the most plausible. It doesn't mean they actually understand it to any great degree, and this is why things like biological determinism and these things like evolutionary psychology sneak in through the door, because if you don't really understand these scientific fields to any depth other than the most obvious superficial, this is when you can get misunderstandings. For example, race realists think that, as far as I'm aware, they think white people and black people are two different species. They think they're two different species of primate. So if we had like the the whole diagram drawn out, there'd be two separate species of the genus Homo, with white people, black people, presumably Asian people have their own little species as well. And if any of these races interbreed, presumably we've created some kind of half breed of two different species. Which science doesn't back that up. Science says that really there isn't such a thing as race in biology. In biology, we have a number of subcategories. I'll try and list them if I can find a screen grab. Race is not one of them. Race is purely a social and political term. It's a term we use socially, politically, colloquially, but it doesn't actually have a scientific meaning. So their belief there is just from a very skewed understanding of evolution. So they've accepted evolution, but they've accepted it rather than understood it. It's not so much that they understand evolution; they just reject creationism. And I think that's what most ordinary run-of-the-mill kind of atheists are. They're just ordinary people. They're not scientific geniuses or anything like that. The most outspoken atheists are going to be science types, obviously, because the most outspoken atheists will be people like Richard Dawkins, and they're going to speak out against creationism a lot because creationism interferes with their work. They're working in the field of evolutionary biology. They're going to constantly be hassled and pestered by annoying creationist people trying to debunk their work, and it's going to start annoying them after a while. And that's probably the focus of their anti-theistic, efforts, if you like, is to just debunk this, because it's probably the most annoyance to them. So anyway, I'd be interested to know what people think. If you could let me know what you think, everybody. Goodbye.